President Trump said he's waiting for Saudi Arabia to finish its investigation into the disappearance of Jamal Khashoggi, but acknowledged it appears the Saudi journalist is dead. Turkey has accused a Saudi hit squad of murdering the Washington Post columnist and critic of Saudi Arabia in the kingdom's consulate in Istanbul. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo briefed the president on the matter this morning after meeting with officials in Saudi Arabia and Turkey this week. Leaving Washington today, Mr. Trump was asked by reporters if Khashoggi was killed and what consequences the Saudis should face if they're responsible.
It certainly looks that way to me. It's very sad. It certainly looks that way. Well, it'll have to be very severe. I mean, it's bad stuff. But we'll see what happens.
Today, a pro-government Turkish newspaper published images from 2 weeks ago showing a man linked to the Saudi crown prince entering the Saudi consulate just before Khashoggi arrived. The Saudis have denied any involvement. We'll take a closer look at the impact of Khashoggi's writing later in the program. Meanwhile, U.S. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin announced he's pulling out of an investment conference in Saudi Arabia next week. In Afghanistan, the Taliban conducted what Afghan and U.S. officials told PBS NewsHour was one of the most significant assassinations of the war. It happened in the southern district of Kandahar. Abdul Raziq, Kandahar's police chief and one of the most influential men in southern Afghanistan, was killed by bodyguards of Kandahar's governor, who was also killed in the attack. Afghan and U.S. officials describe Raziq as essential to keeping Kandahar secure and fear some instability ahead of Saturday's parliamentary elections. But the UN also accused Raziq of human rights abuses. The attack just missed the new U.S. commander in Afghanistan, Army General Scott Miller, but wounded an American soldier, contractor, and civilian. Back in this country, White House counsel Don McGahn has left his post after 21 months on the job. McGahn was a major figure behind the Trump administration's efforts to confirm conservative judges and eliminate government regulations. He's also a key witness to special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. McGahn will be temporarily replaced by President Trump's legal advisor, Emmett Flood, until his permanent successor, Pat Cipollone, takes over. Florida officials now say Hurricane Michael killed at least 20 people there, raising the storm's overall death toll across 4 states to at least 30. More than 137,000 homes and businesses in Florida and Georgia are still without power, more than a week after Michael made landfall. The U.S. Justice Department has opened an investigation into child sex abuse in the Roman Catholic Church in Pennsylvania. Federal prosecutors subpoenaed dioceses throughout the state last week. That follows a Pennsylvania state grand jury report from the summer which identified 301 predator priests who molested more than 1,000 children for decades. The former head of USA Gymnastics was arrested last night for removing evidence related to the sexual abuse case of Dr. Larry Nassar. Steve Penny was indicted for taking documents from the Texas Caroli Ranch training facility that would have helped in the investigation. Nassar, the gymnastics team doctor, was sentenced last February to up to 125 years in prison for sexually assaulting more than 150 girls and women. British Prime Minister Theresa May says she's open to extending the transition period for Britain's exit from the European Union by a few months. That as Brexit talks have stalled over questions about the border between EU member Ireland and British Northern Ireland. May wrapped up a 2-day summit with EU leaders in Brussels today that was once thought to be a deal deadline. Still, she remained optimistic.
These are always going to be tough negotiations, and they were always going to get tougher before we got to the closing stages of the negotiations. On the withdrawal agreement, there are a few but considerable outstanding issues in relation to the Northern Irish backstop. I'm committed to working with the Commission and EU leaders to resolve these as quickly as possible.
The UK is scheduled to leave the bloc on March 29th. Military relations between the U.S. and China appear to be on more solid ground today. U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis met with his Chinese counterpart on the sidelines of a regional summit in Singapore. They discussed the disputed South China Sea but didn't reach any new agreements. The meeting comes amid a tense trade war between the two countries. Israel's Supreme Court today overturned a deportation order for a detained American graduate student. 22-year-old Leila Al-Qassam had been denied entry to Israel after arriving with a valid student visa more than 2 weeks ago. Israel's government had accused her of supporting an illegal boycott against the country. Al-Qassam will now be able to study and stay in Israel. And it was another volatile day of trading on Wall Street. The Dow Jones Industrial Average plunged 327 points to close at 25,379. The Nasdaq fell 157 points, and the S&P 500 slipped 40. Still to come on the NewsHour, new evidence suggesting the Saudi crown prince was involved in the alleged murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Inside the desperate journey Central Americans undertake for a better life in the U.S. The federal budget deficit swells as spending increases and revenues fall. Plus, much more.